Cities vote differently than rural areas if you haven't noticed. Look at any election map and it's mostly red with little clusters of blue in more urban areas. But there's another map floating around which instead shows large blue dots for population, with the message that land doesn't vote, but people do. And this is true. But I think the point made by the mostly red land map is that a bunch of city folks are controlling how the country folks govern. I don't really see rural America clamoring to control how cities are run. I do see urbanites demanding control over, well, just about everything. And in the context of a city, it makes sense to think that there needs to be more rules. You're living in close proximity to a lot of other people. That requires more logistics and increases the probability of conflict just based on the number of people that you come into contact with. There's an old saying that at the federal level I'm libertarian, at the state level Republican, at the local level Democrat, and at the family level communist. The problem comes when you try to take policies that might make sense for a city and force them on the entire nation. But still, blue for Democrat and red for Republican are extremely broad and bad indicators for how people want to be governed. When people feel forced to choose between the lesser of two evils, they will choose whichever party they feel more closely aligns with their values. And yet, Austin, Texas is not run like Portland, Oregon, and Montana has different interests than Tennessee. It's actually encouraging to hear more people say that America might be better off splitting into two along party lines. 6 or even 11 separate countries would be better, along cultural fault lines that run from the beginning of European settlement of North America, as I discuss in my video on the 11 rival cultures of North America, which have always fought to control DC and exert their authority over the rest of the regions. Or maybe 50 countries would be best, one for each state. The smart ones would join open borders, defense, and trade agreements, but make sure not to be forced into a federation. This time, they should make clear from the beginning that they have the freedom to leave. That would ensure that any larger political bodies formed require the consent of the smaller members. And without that consent, the larger body would have no authority over the smaller. And I certainly think any of this would be a step in the right direction. But why not 314 countries in the former United States? That's the number of cities in the United States which have a population of over 100,000. Better yet, why not 3,100 if all the counties in the United States formed their own countries? Or even 19,502 if every incorporated area in the United States, like towns and municipalities, declared independence. Again, sometimes it benefits a small nation to be part of a larger federation. And these places could easily team up for things like defense and trade if they found such an arrangement to be mutually beneficial. It doesn't have to feel that different than traveling, shipping, doing business, or moving across the United States feels right now. You already have to be familiar with local laws in order to not get in trouble for certain victimless crimes. Everything from taking your shirt off to smoking pot could get you very different treatment depending on where you do it. But the structural changes would make all the difference. We wouldn't be locked in a battle for control over this centralized power which can exert its will on everyone else. Otherwise, any large centralized governing structures which have something to offer smaller entities would have to deliver, or risk losing its members, support, and funding. And if all those moving parts working together sounds very messy and complicated to you, so would, for instance, how the beer supply chain works. Do you know where the ingredients like hops and barley come from and how to grow them? Do you know how the breweries source these ingredients? Do you understand the shipping routes and logistics it takes to deliver these raw materials? How much do you know about the brewing process, the science behind it, and creating the proper taste? Then there is packaging and distribution, marketing, advertising, and so on. That is a confusing and complicated process as well. And yet the farms, the shippers, the brewers, and the distributors are able to work together to get beer delivered with remarkable consistency, always on demand. All the moving parts coordinate with each other for mutual benefit to set up a system that works. Precisely because it is not centralized and controlled from the top down is why all these participants in the system can work together for the benefit of the sellers, the producers, the consumers, and so on. And that's why you have more options when it comes to beer than when it comes to government. Beer supplies are constant, reliable, and always get where they need to be. Your choices range from big companies with gross beer like Budweiser to few small companies with good beer like Cigar City in Tampa, and everything in between. Some of the small brewers grow into big brewers like Sam Adams. Some of the bad ones go extinct, like Knickerbocker or Falstaff. Imagine if terrible governments could go out of business. That's what happens with a real free market. And actually, beer is a perfect example because it used to be highly regulated and there were only a few crappy options. But once the regulations were ditched, the craft beer movement was born. So take that, IPA-loving hipsters, but I digress. The point is, we should be choosing government the same way that we choose beer. I can handle the fact that some terrible brews exist as long as I'm not forced to fund them or drink the final product. If there was a market for government, we might end up with something that we actually like. And yes, something different for different tastes. I'm allergic to bureaucracy, just like some people have gluten intolerance. And yes, there's even beers for them. So here's how we turn government into a beer garden. Democracy sucks.
Well, I didn't vote for you.
But this is how to make it suck a little less. Democracy is allegedly our voice in government. Do you feel heard? I don't either. But add exit and that solves everything. Exit can happen in two ways. You can literally move to a better place, which I've done twice. The problem is that we have massive governments claiming large swaths of land. The US government is even worse in that respect than most because it claims 320 million citizens as tax cattle who owe Uncle Sam money no matter where they live, work, or earn a living. Just moving outside of the US does not divorce you from the IRS. And even if that wasn't the case, there are still fewer than 200 countries on Earth to choose from. So yes, there is already some choice to exit to a better place, but again, you have a better selection of beers than governments. So here's another way to exit. Say a democracy votes and you end up in the minority, and you have to accept the fact that other people want to govern differently than you. But what if you still had the option to exit without moving? That means you simply mark off a smaller geographical area that decides it will govern itself and have another vote. For example, the majority of voters in a city of 50,000 people vote for socialism, but a 15,000 person suburb doesn't like that idea. So they vote to form their own monarchy. But a 2,000 person neighborhood in that suburb doesn't like monarchy. So they form an anarcho-syndicalist commune.
We're an anarcho-syndicalist commune.
And here's where it gets fun. If just one property owner doesn't like that new government that he's been voted into, he can also declare his property sovereign. The concept of private property itself deserves its own video, so if you're interested in that, let me know in the comments. But essentially, private property could be the entirety of the law, and government would simply be an open market of contracts and dispute resolution around the concept of self-ownership, which is more or less the same concept as private property, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But even if you had a sovereign chunk of land, you would still have to follow the rules when you go onto other people's property and into their jurisdictions. You would still have to maintain good diplomatic relations in order to go to the supermarket, get on a plane, or use other property like roads. But the home would truly be the castle. Now, there's a lot to unpack here. Part of interacting with the other areas of society which benefit you would, of course, require submitting to some of their rules. But you wouldn't be forced to. You could conceivably be left alone on your land and produce, or probably just have delivered, everything you need. Victimizing others would still be met with consequences, mirroring common law, where the entirety of the law was dispute resolution. If that sounds interesting, I do have a video which introduces and explores this common law type of justice system. I'll link at the end. But I'm not going to get into that here because it's another concept that just sounds super confusing and messy, a lot like beer production. But again, we have every reason to believe that all the moving parts forming mutually beneficial transactions to resolve disputes will end up not with utopia, but with a better system of social organization than the one we currently have with the top-down centralized power approach. Okay, let's add one more twist before we wrap this up. Who cares if the group that you join or create is in the same geographical area as you? This is the modern age, connected via the internet. Why do my neighbor and I have to subscribe to the same government? Shouldn't I be able to pick and choose which services I want from a government and which service provider has the best coverage and price for my situation? Neil Stephenson, my favorite sci-fi author, wrote a book called The Diamond Age, where he talks about the first distributed government. It's basically like AAA. No matter where your car breaks down, they will still come help you out, which usually means contracting with local repair shops to get the job done. So in the Diamond Age, when one character robs the wrong person, he is hunted down and taken into custody by other members of the victim's tribe in this case. To cover their own legal liability as they hogtie him, however, they ask if the suspect has any representation, as in, does he subscribe to a distributed government that would back him up here? If so, there are sets of rules that most of these legitimate governments agree on beforehand to solve disputes peacefully among members of two different distributed governments. The idea is that they represent you fairly, but do not protect actual criminals. That's part of your original agreement with the distributed government, like insurance. So in the book, this guy does not subscribe to any government, sort of like driving around without car insurance. Anyway, Neal Stephenson is able to unpack a lot of complicated concepts through fiction, so I definitely recommend reading any of his books. Or for a fictional representation of the type of governments that I'm talking about here, check out my own fiction serial called The Gulf. It involves a floating city seastead, a corrupt celebrity, a prison island, and of course, a young couple in love. You'll laugh, you'll cry, and the first season is out now and completely free to read, listen to, or watch online. Just follow the links below. I'm Joe Jarvis, thanks for watching, come back and see me again soon.